The August 8th Ascension Parish Planning Commission meeting will now come to order. Madam Secretary, please note that all commission members are present. If you would, please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Secretary, will you start the introductions, please, of staff members that are present?
Stacy Webb, Secretary for Planning and Development.
Lindsay Manda, Legal Counsel for Planning and Zoning.
Ricky Compton, Planning and Development Director.
Ben Laurie, Ascension Parish Chief Engineer.
LaVarn Bourgeois, Parish Building Department, Building Official.
Thank you. The chair has no comments for tonight. Madam Secretary, do we have any public comment?
Billy Aguilar.
These are for items on the agenda that aren't open for public hearing.
Yes, sir. This is on item number 11. I think it's the last item on the agenda. So staff report for ordinance SR 12-02, testing for compliance with specifications. I'm not here to criticize anybody. I'm not here to criticize any staff member. I think they do a wonderful job. They overworked, and Ben does an excellent job. This, I think, came from prior staff people that are no longer here. But what they're asking for is to provide testing reports. Final inspection will not be scheduled until testing reports required on the construction certification testing requirement checklist, which is this list, have been received and reviewed and found to be in accordance with approved construction specifications by chief engineer or designee. This checklist was part of a specification that was done by CSRS in 2006 that was never adopted. So this checklist was never even adopted. And some of the testing reports that they're asking for are not required by parish ordinance at this time. And I'm not saying it doesn't need to be done, but before we ask that all these tests be submitted before we do a final inspection on the subdivision or any other project that requires a public hearing, that we ought to straighten the ordinance out to specify what needs to be done and exactly what test needs to be done. The only tests right now that are required by parish ordinance are for sewer. A pressure test, then a mandrel test, I believe, and a smoke test. And then the subdivision specification or the subdivision regulations today revert back to DOTD specifications. But it says in the ordinance for design and construction of. It doesn't say design, construction, and testing of subdivision streets. And all I'm here to say is, and I'm willing to help, and they all know that, and I had helped redo the specification that was never adopted in '06. But before we ask that all these tests be submitted, let's make an ordinance that requires these tests to be submitted and what we need to test. For instance, it requires for testing of, see exactly what it says, compaction reports on buildable areas of the subdivision. Well, if you don't put any fill on a lot, why do you need to do a compaction test on it? What the ordinance that we adopted before said was that if you put over 2 foot of fill, you need to put it in 1 foot lifts and test each lift as you bring it up. And some of these subdivisions have 5, 6 foot of fill on it. So what kind of compaction test do we want? The final compaction test? What about the dirt 2 or 3 foot down? We need to do a compaction test on 1 foot lifts and do it correctly. And that's what's causing some of the problems that they have now. Even roads have 6 foot of fill underneath some of the roads in the parish, and they failing because the compaction test wasn't done correctly. All I'm asking is that let's specify in specifications and ordinances what needs to be tested and how the work needs to be done before we put all these requirements in place before we do a final inspection. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Excellent points. Anyone else?
No.
Okay. First item is a public hearing to approve or deny the following family petitions. Larry Jumonville property. Do we have the applicant present? Oh, I'm sorry. Before you do that, I skipped over something. We need to either approve or deny the minutes of the June 13th Planning Commission meeting. Entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second. And a second. All in favor, aye? Aye. Motion's passed. Did you catch it? Okay. Mr. Callender, Mr. Nizzo. Okay. Yes, sir.
James Falgo, representing the Millet family on the following family partition. Comments were made, addressed, and corrected on the plat, asking the commission for approval.
Anyone else to speak? No one? No public comment? Staff still okay? Entertain a motion to approve or deny?
Just one question. The acreage shown on the write-up that we got from staff and the acreage shown on the plat's different. Not that that's, so which one's correct? I guess the one on the plat's correct, right?
Yeah, they're correct on the plat.
Okay.
I move that we approve.
I second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next is a public hearing to approve or deny family petition of Ronald L. Valley property. We have the applicant.
Good evening. Clint Quintmall, representing W.J. Quintmall Surveyors. Asking for planning commission approval on the Ronnie Valley family partition. There was a couple comments. I want to touch base on number 3. There was a drafting error on it's really not a closure error, but actually a drafting error where some distances were left off on lot Z1. That has been corrected, and all the lots close.
Do we have any other public comment? Staff, are you still okay with it? Entertain a motion for approval or denial?
Motion to approve, Mr. Chairman. Recommend approval.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You have a good evening.
Next is a public hearing to approve or deny the following subdivision final plat, Greystone, second filing. Do we have the applicant?
Yes, sir. My name is Greg Bro with Sigma Consulting Group. This is the final plat for the second filing of Greystone subdivision. To the best of my knowledge, all issues regarding this plat have been addressed. I've spoken with Mr. Tim Ward, and as far as he was able to tell me today, there are no outstanding issues, so we just request approval, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Any other public comment? Staff? Entertain a motion for approval or denial?
Someone's
Oh, I'm
raising a
sorry.
hand.
Is this the property at the end of Autumn View subdivision?
I think that was the last one, actually. Autumn leaves.
Entertain a motion for approval or denial?
Before we motion for approval, I'd like to ask engineering your comments on this.
The final inspection was done. There was only one punch list item found that day, and they cleared it up that day. So all punch list items have been addressed. All testing reports have been submitted. So everything that we're supposed to check off has been checked off.
Motion?
Move for approval.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed. Thank you, sir. Next is a public hearing to recommend approval or denial to the parish council of the following servitude revocation. Annie Virginia Brignac Estate. Is the applicant present?
Good evening, guys. Chad Despino, requesting approval to revoke the 15-foot drainage.
Do we have any public comment on this? None? Staff? Your recommendation is to approve?
Thank you.
No, wait, before you go,
Wait.
And then the-
I want to make sure we've got,
I have a question.
okay, questions.
Mr. Spino, you read the letter. Do you have a copy of this letter from Mr. Rue, or to Mr. Rue from the drainage engineer about the servitudes?
Yes, sir, we do. My name's Gary Magliola. I'm the one that sent it to Mr. Bill with Darrell Primo,
Right.
and I do have a copy of the letter.
Okay, y'all okay with that? We don't have
Yes,
no
sir. We
problems
got
with
one
that.
little thing right here, but the actual tracks are E1 and E2 on the mapping.
Okay,
And Bill, or Darrell sent a letter to Bill, Mr. Rue, at a E1A and E1B, which is, that's worded wrong.
E2A.
As the map is stated at E1 and E2.
okay.
I just wanted to bring that to y'all's attention.
Other than that correction, we're okay with the
Yes, sir.
servitudes, the new servitude, okay.
And staff, you're okay? Okay. Any other questions?
I move that we recommend approval.
All right,
Second.
second. All in favor?
Aye.
Sanji. Josh. Thank you. Next is a public hearing to recommend approval or denial to the parish council of servitude revocation, Alvin P. Hanson, Deborah S. Pellerin, Brian Hanson, and Michelle Hanson properties. We have the applicant.
Good evening. The Hansons and the Pellerins used to own the property. The school board entered a purchase agreement to purchase the property, and we were asking to get the servitudes revocated. Since the time we've applied, the school board has actually made the purchase, so now we're the owners of the tracks. So now we're officially asking for the servitudes to be revocated.
Any public comment? Staff, you're still okay? Question?
Yeah, just a quick question. Are we revoking or requesting to revoke the utility servitude and the drainage servitude?
Yeah, it's only utility on here.
Because it only
I saw
lists it
utility.
as the utility servitude. And I think that that's a minor thing at this point, because I think that if this group is amicable to this change, you could change your request for drainage pending a letter from the drainage board before it goes to the council. But just so that we don't make you go back through this process, because I don't even see the drainage approval on the list, but I'm pretty sure that based on what your plans are, that you're going to resolve all these issues before you're building a school anyway.
Right. One of the thought processes was that we need to relocate a ditch that's on this site anyway before construction would start. So we were going to come back to do the relocation of the ditch, remove the drainage servitude, and create new servitudes all around the property once we get that far. But that might be 2-3 years from now.
The ditch that you need to relocate is in this 15-foot drainage servitude?
It's the one that runs east and west.
Okay, the big one that you have to relocate.
So we were thinking utilities now, drainage later when we get closer to building the school,
Okay.
create new.
So the question before us is just the utility
Utility
easement?
servitude.
Okay,
But if
that's fine.
if it makes it cleaner to do the north-south now, then I'm all about it now, but
I guess as it makes it cleaner to do what's listed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then come back when you know what you're going to.
Right. Is there anything in the north-south drainage servitude? See, I think that
Right.
was the issue there, is that there's nothing even in it. It was planned for the back of B2, B3, B4, B5, and it was just put in place in case he ever needed to build something, but there's nothing in it. But I guess for cleanliness, it makes sense just to do utility and let them do their engineering and rework those
In case
drainage
something
servitudes
changes.
later.
Okay,
because we got to engineer the site anyway for drainage on the whole site.
right.
So-
All right, so
We'll
the
make
question
sure you
before
get
us
what
is
you want.
to revoke just the utility easement.
Yeah, that's all that's on the request.
Any public comment? Any other concerns? Entertain a motion?
Yeah, I'd make a motion to approve it, just a 12-foot utility servitude.
Second?
I'll second.
Motion passed.
That's,
Okay, last is the staff report.
This is the item that Mr. Aguilar spoke on at the beginning of the meeting. This item is born out of a bit of a frustrating history. The engineering department is tasked with essentially providing quality assurance for these developments. And in my time at the parish, we've gone through this a number of times with the previous planning commission, where the code doesn't really specify a clean process. And in an effort to do that, we generated a checklist, and I have a copy if, you guys want one. Sorry it wasn't in the packet. But we took existing checklists, which there were numerous that the parish was using that had been developed over the years, and combined those into one. And the things that are on this checklist aren't things we added. We clarified some. They had vague references to, go test concrete. Well, since our code defaults to the DOTD specifications, we found the reference in DOTD that made the most sense for the type of, testing that would be relevant to that particular item. And we put that all on a checklist, and when we have a pre-construction meeting for development, we bring out this checklist and we say, hey, we need a game plan that we're all going to follow so we're all on the same page. Is there any issue with this checklist? It's not codified, as Mr. Aguilar said, and it should perhaps be. But it's a way so that we're all working off of the same page. And one of the elements, another element to this, so that's kind of the background. The previous planning commission did not like final plats coming before the commission until everything was done. And in the past, the parish had been under the practice of, they do a final inspection and it comes before the board, or the commission, with recommendations. The caveat is, final inspection was done, there's punch list items, and we're still waiting on these testing reports. We were told essentially, don't do that anymore, don't let it come to this commission until it's done. And so we started trying to enact that. And in this checklist, and we state this at the pre-construction meeting, request for final inspection must be made 2 weeks prior to the planning commission meeting. A final inspection will not be scheduled until testing reports of the above certifications have been received and reviewed. And the only goal of this, and I don't disagree with Mr. Aguilar, is to clarify the process. The real fix is that there needs to be revisions to our code to incorporate this, and maybe this is a bit of a Band-Aid. It's kind of operating under the way the parish operated for years. It just put it on paper to formalize it to a degree. And so that's where we're coming from. We just want something that we can point to and say, these are the tests that we've received in the past, these are the ones we need, and as we approach the end of a project, we can go and say, I still need this and this and this. As far as revising the code to not have the final inspection until all of these things were in, it was born out of the previous commission saying, don't come to us until this is done. Obviously, as the contractor's nearing completion, he wants to get this thing on the agenda, so there's a lot of pressure on us to do that, but at the same time, we don't want these things coming through, getting essentially final plat approval, and then, oh, wait, we can't get this testing report because we've already buried that pipe, put the road over it, whatever. So it's an effort to kind of keep those issues from arising and find a solution to them before it comes to you, because we don't want to get a conditional approval that then requires something to go be dug up or something where we're put in a position of making some sort of call that, oh, yeah, we can't get that test, but this will do. We'd like to have that solution presented at the time that you guys are making the final plat approval. So that's...
So as part of the proposed ordinance, would that checklist be codified as it is now? Would that be part of the new ordinance?
It isn't now, and maybe that's something that you could direct us to do, is go back, figure out how to incorporate this into the ordinance. We wanted to get the conversation started and find out kind of a direction that made the most sense. It's been something that's caused issues in the past.
Mr. Aguilar, would you come back up?
Appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen. And again, I don't have any problem with the checklist, but we need to specify, I mean, daily installation reports, what are we asking for? Let's specify what we're asking for. Material submittals, what are we asking for material submittals? None of this is required by code now to be submitted. So we got to specify before we say we're going to have a checklist, and even if you codify this checklist, there's not a code saying what are these submittals that have to be submitted. Bedding material analysis, there's nothing really in the code right now that states what bedding material should be. We need to have a specification that states what bedding material should be. And again, the buildable area compaction reports in subdivision, there's nothing in any ordinance on any development code or anything that we have now that specifies what these compaction tests should be. Is it 95 standard, 95 modified? What are we asking for? And if there's no fill on the lot, if it's natural dirt, you don't need to do a test on it. So I'm saying, we got to clarify what kind of tests we want before we codify this checklist. And it's that simple. And like I say, I'm not speaking against anything we're trying to do. I think this checklist needs to be done, and I think we need all these reports. But again, we need to straighten out the codes to say that this is what needs to be done, because we don't know exactly what needs to be done. You know, some of the stuff that's specified on the roadway construction where it defaults to DOTD specifications, there's a whole lot of tests that they're not requiring us to do. So we selectively require tests on lime, salt, cement, and cylinders for curbs. But there's a whole lot of other tests that DOTD specifies in their specification that we're not even asking for. And they're really not necessary in subdivisions. So all I'm saying is if we're going to do this, let's specify what we need and what we need to do this, then let's do it right. And I'm easy to get along with, but if you get a developer that gets mad at you because they get a final inspection, there's no way that you can beat them in court. There's your legal answer. If it's not a code, you can't beat them in court. And I mean, these people have got $2-3 million tied up in a subdivision, and we're not going to do a final inspection because they don't have one test report? It's crazy. And I'm saying, and this really came up because I complained because I didn't have some of the testing reports, okay? So I complained, and I went to talk to Ben. I said, Ben, the guy I need to talk to is on vacation. He'll be gone for a week. I need to schedule this final inspection so we can do punch list items now, and we will have everything to you before the deadline to get on the planning commission agenda. And it worked out fine. They got all the test reports. There was nothing on the punch list items, and it was done. And if somebody else comes to him, all he has to do is ask to pull the item from the agenda. It's that simple. So y'all won't fuss at him. And all I'm asking is that and I know they don't have the time and the effort to do it right now. I know they snowed under. They do excellent work. They're busy. They're understaffed. I know all that. But we can't ask for an arbitrary test report that doesn't specify exactly what we're going to do, and they don't have a specification telling us exactly what to do and how to do it. That's all I'm asking. And I've volunteered to be on a committee to help redraw subdivision construction specifications. And Ben knows that, and Ben knows that I'm not criticizing him at all or the staff at all, or anybody on this planning commission. A lot of this stuff was done by prior planning commission, and what really happened with subdivision specification is CSRS in '06 developed a subdivision specification, and it was really detrimental to contractors, okay, and engineers. So we came and about 20 of us complained. So Councilman Shakes and I set up a committee. We reviewed the specifications, made changes, presented it back to CSRS. CSRS agreed, and everybody agreed, and we had a mutual agreement. I came to the meeting and said we agreed with the specification. So they put it on the agenda for a 30-day public hearing. We came back, and CSRS took what we agreed to, threw it in a trash can, and brought their original specification back up. So we complained again, and that's why it never got approved. And it still sits today. There's about 5 or 6 revisions of the specification that's sitting on my desk today that and of course they're busy, they don't have time to do it, and so it's never got approved. And this checklist was one of the items. This is originally where it came from, was from that '06 revision that CSRS did, and it's been revised, like Ben said, numerous times to get the things that they need. And to be honest with you, they need these things. Okay. They need this, and they need more of these things in here. But to ask for some of these things that are not required by code, if somebody decides to sue you, you can't beat them in court. They ask your attorney.
We got it now.
And that's all I'm saying. You see what I'm saying?
I mean, there are specific references for the tests we're asking for. DOTD specifications are for building highways. Our code defaults to the DOTD specifications, and we're building subdivisions. So there's a disconnect there. The task that we have is looking at the construction and making sure that it's meeting some kind of standard. So we went through and kind of found out what are the minimum things we need in order to be able to say with any certainty that they're following this standard. So, we took the DOTD specifications and we took out the bridge trust part of this, because, obviously that doesn't have a pertinence to the subdivisions that we're building. We reference those things in here, and I don't disagree with Mr. Aguilar, but we have to have something, and this was a quick fix, rather than trying to go rewrite our development code. Writing specifications, I mean, DOTD has spent millions and millions of dollars over many years developing their specifications, and there's a lot of time and effort and resources that need to go into developing a set of specifications, and at this time, the parish.
You brought up that some work has already been done. Is it possible to look at some of that to see if we might incorporate it?
We have, and you know, we met before on it a few
We've been
times.
a number of times on it, and we've been kind of working on it, but they don't have the time, and when they get the time, I don't have the time, so it's kind of a difficult process, but, yeah, I guess, and I agree with everything that's been saying. We need these reports, and they need to be in here. But we just need, if we could just maybe, if we could just maybe specify on here what tests, what are we gonna require on buildable pads compaction? You know, just a brief statement on those things, what we want to call. We don't have to redo the whole specification, but before we adapt this, let's say what tests we need.
Right.
And clarify some of the test results that we need.
Right. The building pad compaction is something born out of the building code.
It is, but if it's natural soil, you don't need a
But there are instances, as one subdivision in particular, where there was no fill
Exactly.
on the plan, but, sorry.
Okay. I was involved with some of these specifications that Billy's talking about in the past with CSRS. And I'm not going to speak about roads or drainage or any of that thing. My concern would be where the footprint of the house is to be placed. When in certain areas you're putting fill in, as Billy mentioned, sometimes 6, 8 foot of soil. Well, there's a process, and it is in the building code, and alludes to the residential code, which refers you to the building code. And it's not only the parish of Ascension, but it's also the entire state of Louisiana in Act 12 of the Louisiana Uniform Construction Code. The types of soil that can be placed, and there's a method in there. And if you really would to follow the exact specification there, I don't think any engineer would be happy with it for all they have to submit. The simple plan that we had resolved was the fact that we do a representative test of approximately 10% of the lots at a compaction according to the codes, which in my interpretation was 95% modified Proctor, which we also gave a representative of one sample of 95% modified to compare with a standard Proctor of 90% modified to 95% standard Proctor. See Billy shaking his head. Sees it, yeah. So those were kind of equal. There's a different testing mechanism. So that was kind of a agreement that we had, and as Billy mentioned, it never did meet muster for whatever reason. Never did become law. But that code is present today in any pad, any house pad that is built, if it's in a subdivision or if it's even out in a single lot out in the middle of the country, not a developed subdivision. So that standards already exist for the buildable sites for a resident to rest on. Just drawing short of having a whole geotechnical survey done for each individual house owner, which in some plats in the past, that's how it was written. It is the responsibility of the lot owner for the soil testing, which how is the lot owner going to go and test, 6 foot of soil after, it doesn't been approved? The time to do it is when it's being placed, and the lift that it's going to be put in, and the type of compaction. I don't really care if they use a sheep foot roller, if they use one of these plants towers of roller across and bracket. But when the tests come out for every lift, every 1 foot be tested. Again, I don't think it's fair to make them test every lot, a buildable lot, but at least 10% representative. Now, the issue back then was if a percentage of those 10% fail, what you do. That was kind of the issue at hand, and we never resolved that really to any full extent. Well, I just wanted to let you guys understand that, yeah, we've been dealing with this for the last 8-10 years, I guess, to be honest with you. So it's an issue that could be resolved, but there is a process already in the standards today.
Mr. Nizo had a question.
Ben, on this list, this checklist, is this anything different than we're presently doing? I mean, we have procedures in place for each one of these tests and already.
Yeah, these are all things that the parish has traditionally received during construction.
Right. So it's nothing new.
It was spread out across multiple checklists that we compiled into this one checklist.
Right.
But,
so basically what we're looking at with this possible ordinance is just putting in place a requirement that this list be completed and turned in prior to final approval.
essentially, yes.
So we're not asking for anything new. And I'll agree with you, Mr. Aguilar, that possibly there's some other things that need to be added to it. But at this particular time, this is what we have to go by, and we're really only looking for a requirement that is completed prior to it being presented for final approval.
Correct.
Thank you.
What do we have in place now that holds the developer or the contractor accountable for turning in testing, lab reports after a final inspection's given? Anything?
I mean, the code kind of dictates what we're supposed to do. It doesn't specifically reference these things. It does default to the DOTD specifications, which, I mean, gets back to the argument that if we, go there, are we building a highway, or are we building a subdivision? So it's hard to measure things up. There's not a whole lot of sewer specifications in DOTD
Right.
specs. That's why that's the only instance in the code where we actually went in and specified specific things. And that was done in the past, long before I was here, but, I mean, I'm assuming that's the reason, because DOTD doesn't build sewer. There was
And-
nothing to reference in DOTD specs, so the parish came up with its own for that instance.
In code versus ordinances, I mean, we have subdivision specifications from, 2003? And you guys were looking at this in 2006?
I think it's subdivision regulations. It doesn't call it subdivision specifications, if I'm correct. Y'all might have corrected it when y'all did the revision and
It's still called regulations, but it
Right.
references
And does
DOTD
that
specifications
2003
in the regulations.
flow well with this checklist? Is that one of the problems, it seems like? It doesn't
There's
flow
not-
well with the checklist?
There's not a lot for this to conflict with in the regulations.
There's not a lot for the checklist to conflict with in
Right, because
regulations?
it doesn't get too much into the meat of the issue. It just
And maybe
kind
it
of
needs to.
generically defaults to DOTD specifications. So, there's a million tests that are required for DOTD, depending on what you're doing. And there's 50
How do we
different
pick and
ones.
choose which ones?
Right, and so we tried to go through and say, these are the ones that make sense.
don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we don't need this stuff. We
Right.
need it. It needs to be there. And it needs to be tested. And there probably needs to be more tests. And for instance, like Mr. Laverne said, what Mr. Laverne is referring to is the IRC, and I think what we adopted, the 09 IRC, Mr. Laverne. The 09 IRC code, International Residential Code, specifies that the lots be compacted, or Mr. Laverne can make the owners go get compaction test on it. But the subdivision specification has none of that language in it. And the IRC code has nothing to do with us developing subdivisions and/or commercial properties. And if we got 6 foot of fill on a lot, it needs to be tested in every lift. I agree with that 100%. But nothing that we have on code now requires that test. And like Ben said, the sewer tests that are required now, there is some sewer tests in the regulations now that are required. It's a manual test, I think a pressure test, and a smoke test after it's finished. But it doesn't require bedding tests, it doesn't require bedding compaction, it doesn't require backfill compaction, none of that stuff is required. What do we require? I mean, some of the sewer lines are 12 foot deep. What do we test? And to be honest with you, what they're asking for is relatively easy to get. But what do we require? I know underneath the road, what we used to go by before this 06, this checklist, I think this checklist was starting to use around 07, something like that. But before they used that, if you use sand backfill on the roads, they didn't require any compaction test at all, because basically you put sand in, you walk on it, it's compacted. And now they're requiring compaction test on bedding material, which is really not required for in the Ascension Parish subdivision regulations.
But it is in the DOTD specification.
Not sewer. There's no DOTD specification that requires sewer compaction anywhere, because there's no specifications on sewer and DOT specifications. It requires for storm drains and culverts. There's no sewer specification in DOT specifications at all, no sewer specification in DOT specifications at all, no.
Sounds like a lot needs to be.
Yeah.
It's a difficult
Sounds
thing,
like-
and what I'm saying, it's not an easy task. And maybe we could take this checklist and just define what test are we gonna require on this checklist. And, I'd be happy with that temporarily till we get everything approved, but we need to kind of do some definitions of what are we gonna require?
The checklist defines it, right? For compaction reports on trench backfill, there's a footnote, 3. Compaction testing for trench backfill, mid and top lifts, and the pipe bedding shall be submitted for at least one location between all structures and outfalls with at least 20 feet of separation. For pipe runs falling within the right-of-way or under improved surfaces, testing shall occur once for each 100 feet of piping. 25% of all sanitary sewer service crossings must be tested. Compaction testing shall verify compliance with LADOTD specifications for roads and bridges, Section 70108, unless alternate specifications are submitted and approved prior to permit issuance. And there's that opening as well, because at the meeting, we say, hey, is this the rule book that we're going to play by? Or do you have some other one? Some engineers come with the Baton Rouge specifications and say, this is what we want to use, this is what we designed based on, and we say, that's fine, give us that, that's the rule book we're going to play by on this construction.
Where is this pulled from? Where does this fit into is this part of the subdivision specifications?
Oh, that's page 2 of the checklist.
It's just, that's the only place it would exist, is just on the checklist?
Right, and again, this was trying to narrow the focus of that DOTD specification that has 50 different compaction testing requirements for various trench situations. So,
It sounds like you're saying this almost needs to be code.
Well,
This
it
needs
does,
to be entered.
all I'm saying is it needs to be code. Again, I'm easy to get along with, but if you could turn down some developer because, we covered up a pipe and we forgot to do one compaction test, and you're not gonna give them, you can go dig it up and get a compaction test on it if you want to, and which, to be honest with you, I've had to do that in the past, okay? It's something you can do. You can but it might take me 2 weeks to get that done. And in the meantime, all we're asking for is do a final inspection on the subdivision. If you got punch list items, let's do that while we're getting all the rest of these test reports done. And if we don't have it, then don't put it on the agenda, that's all. You just don't put it on the agenda. Or if you have it scheduled, pull it from the agenda if they don't get everything to you by the deadline to have a public notice.
and again, the reason for this is we want to have a solution worked out for those instances where we don't have a testing result before we come to this body. We don't want engineering to be in the position of, in this case, we said they could do the hammer test instead of the cylinder break. And it's hard, we want this to be an open forum so that, this is why, and so that we can, have that dialogue.
And you did let me do that, I appreciate it, by the way.
Yeah.
And we want to be fair and make sure that we're treating
So,
everybody the same, and this is
Would this
part-
be like the first step in a
Indeed.
long process?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a difficult, long process, a time-consuming process, and it needs to have testing lab people involved in it, the engineers involved in it, geotechnical people. It's a long process to do a subdivision specification, it really is.
Well,
And unfortunately, not all the developers we have in Ascension Parish are of the quality that Mr. Aguilar is, so we need something in place that we can point to and say, this is what we need.
but it is a start. It's the first step.
It is a start.
Okay.
And I think we're having a good discussion. I think what's happening here tonight is a start of a good discussion. I think it needs to continue, and again, I'm open, Ben, anytime you want to call me. He's too busy really to call me, so I understand where he's coming from. Anyway, thank y'all.
He's worrying about those other developers.
I appreciate y'all listening to my comments.
Thank you. So, what would you like from us? Should we have more discussion on this? Do y'all want to take another look at it?
Give us a homework assignment to come back next month, or, a direction, I guess, and this is something that, like you said, it's been going on a long time, and it hasn't been moved to the top of the priority list because we got a lot of other things going, and this is something that needs to be fixed, but we got a lot of things that need to be
Well,
fixed.
could you go back, being this is the first look at it, could you go back and see if there's any low-hanging fruit that we could add here that would be fairly easy as a first step, or is this the low-hanging fruit?
That was kind of the goal. This was kind of the kernel, something to grow from, and obviously there's a lot of filling in the blanks that has to happen on all of this, but, I mean, it's really kind of a common ground for us to, when we start off the process, this is what we're working from. We have it, y'all have it. We can't hold you to anything beyond this. Don't expect us to, not require these things. And it's
So
formalization.
So basically, Ben, what you're saying is that this ordinance is not by any means pigeonholing this list as the final list that adjustments can be made to, or this is just something that you can say, this is what I'm basing my decision on this particular presentation, because they didn't do this, or they met all of this, we can recommend yes or no, or we're not going to put it on the agenda because it hadn't been finalized.
Correct, because we don't want to bring things to you guys that haven't been, that may have issues that have to be decided after you've given a conditional approval. I mean,
But this list could still possibly change.
certainly, and if you adopted it and we moved it into an ordinance format, it would have to be changed by ordinance.
Right.
But would the checklist have to be changed every time you want to add something? You'd have to change the ordinance?
That's part of the reason why we've tried to kind of fly by this checklist policy, I guess, because it should be a flexible document. You know,
Right.
the nature of construction is that there are elements that change over time, and there are things there are issues that we're finding in developments that, man, we really should be doing this and check to make sure that doesn't happen again. And things like that, if it requires a whole new ordinance revision in order to incorporate some of these things, our goal is just to make sure that the parish is getting a good product whenever we're accepting public improvements built by developers. And so we
So
want to
the
have.
ordinance would say we have a checklist, and you have to have the checklist, and it would specify that this is the checklist for evermore. The checklist would be subject to change by the engineering
Right.
department?
And there's the part at the end there where we present this at the pre-construction meeting and say, hey, is there something else that we want to play by? Do you want to use the Baton Rouge specification? Do you want to use the City of Austin specifications? Give us something that has been thought out and that we can go by. Ascension Parish doesn't have that spec book developed for our residential developments that we can point to and say, follow this. So, we're not going to be too picky about, formally developed specifications, and we leave that door open, but we want to have some minimum backdrop that says,
Can I shoot myself in the foot real quick? The subdivision regulations gives the parish engineer the right to require testing. Okay? But my opinion is it doesn't give him the right to require testing that is not there by ordinance. So he can require this checklist, but if the testing is not required by ordinance, my opinion is he can't require me to do that test. You can ask for this checklist. You don't have to. It's already in the ordinance, and you can ask for testing. But the testing requirement has to be an ordinance that requires that test. That's all I'm saying.
I need to have some basic information in order to do the job that I've been tasked with doing. And this is an attempt to present that in a formal way. The requiring these things be done before a final is scheduled is sort of the.
Well, it sounds
the
like
hook.
we need a little bit more work in checking with legal to find out. He's brought up some issues. Can you have some in your checklist that's not an ordinance, et cetera? So could that be your homework assignment, is go look at that and come back and say, we've checked all these boxes and we're still okay with the checklist, and perhaps in that interim, you'll come up with some more specified tests that you can throw in there to appease the
Absolutely.
developers. Is that okay? Anybody disagree? Don't undo this now.
I'm not going to do it. I'm saying, Ben, if you'll give me just a couple hours of your time in the next 30 days, I'll sit down with you, and let's go back to some of the stuff that we talked about, like the compaction Mr. Laverne talked about, and let's attach it on that second page that you have for each one of these items and say, this is what we want. And I'll be more than happy to help you do that. And I'll even draft it and bring it back to you, and we'll go with what Mr. Laverne said about the code requires for IRC code, and put that in there on lot testing and stuff like that, and just put an explanation behind each one of these tests you require. I'll be more than happy to draw it up and get my secretary to type it up and bring it back to you for your review. If you'll just give me a couple hours of your time in the next 30 days sometime.
You okay with that? Make them buy lunch?
Jim, let's understand this. When we develop, the subdivision is developed, ultimately the parish takes over a lot of the infrastructure. It's in the best interest of the parish that we have proof of testing of a quality construction of the product that we're going to have to take over and maintain from here on out. I think Billy got his heart in the right place to help us. I think Ben's doing a terrific job.
Y'all have a discussion about that later. I see.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a bad word. But anyway, I'm just saying, it's important. I'm glad this is going on because it's something that needs to be straightened up, and we can
I
all
think we're on the right track.
move
It
forward.
sounds
Yes,
like,
sir.
we
The
can
right
make it a
thing
little
for the right
stronger
reasons.
for the next time.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Do you have time to do it for the next agenda, or do you need more time? We'll kind of leave that to you.
We'll make it happen for the next meeting.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
All right, any other business to come before the commission?
Well, now,
I'm sorry.
do we want to schedule a public hearing at our next meeting?
Or do we
to
want more
discuss it, or do we
discussion?
want to have another staff report?
It's up to you guys. I'm not familiar with how all this
Okay.
process is.
I would suggest that we have another discussion and kind of iron out some of this stuff, if that's okay with
That's fine,
everybody.
yeah.
So what do we need, a motion to table?
I don't think we need anything other than we're going to have another staff report next month with them getting together, and then we can decide if we want to take it to a public hearing. All right. Entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move.
Second? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.